Have either of you ever had acupuncture before?
I've had Reiki.
I don't know what that is.
I'm just kidding. I've never had Reiki's the one where they don't touch you. They just move their hands near you. I haven't done it. I'm a
Wait,
liar.
so they wave at you? Like,
Yeah, but near you. They move their hands in a healing way close to your body. I've never had acupuncture, and I don't want to.
Yeah, no, me neither. I wish I had like an interesting answer and I could relate like an exciting story, but no, never done it. And the idea really terrifies me. I gotta be honest. I'd love to know, if it works. The people who do it swear by it.
I've had punctures.
Yeah, I've punctured myself by accident.
In acupuncture. I got a dart thrown into my leg one time.
really?
Oh.
Yeah.
Like at a bar or like at a party or what?
It was high
someone
school. It was
missed?
just
High
it was
school.
just at a no. He hit exactly where he was
They
aiming.
meant to hit you.
Yeah.
God.
Just threw it right into my shin.
Jesus. Because that's like one of my worst nightmares when there's darts at a bar.
Yeah, like a drunk guy. It's scarier when it's drunk guys. Which
Well, it
this
takes
might
once.
have been actually. I don't know, but yeah, exactly.
It's not scary when your friend's like, I'm going to hit you in the leg with a dart.
Maybe it could have been, but it's high school.
At least with a drunk guy at a bar, there's some deniability. Like, oh no, they didn't do that intentionally.
Sure.
I don't know. No, I'm terrified of needles, though. I've never done acupuncture. No, I couldn't do it. I don't like needles. They terrify
What about
me.
do you donate blood?
No. Even at blood draws, I'm like sweating, and they're all like, I have to. I'm someone who, when I go to the doctor, they have to do my blood pressure twice, because when I get there, I'm like, is there going to be blood involved? Like, I don't care about blood. Like, I could actually just grab a knife and like cut my hand and just be totally fine. That doesn't faze me at all. But as soon as it's a needle, it's like, oh no, I just start sweating, and they're like, okay, calm down, it's fine, you're gonna survive. And it's like, I know, it's just the thought. Yeah, I went to the doctor a while ago, and they're like, you need to go get a blood draw, but you have to schedule an appointment on your own time. So I just kind of walked out of the room and never scheduled
Put it off.
I hope I'm fine.
I hope so too.
Oh well. Welcome once more to Split Picks. We're reporting again from the Split Tooth compound, and it is a lovely day to be in a dungeon. Today, we are embarking on the final episode of our series on Japanese horror. So far, we have covered Takashi Shimizu's Ju-On The Grudge, plus its American remakes, and that was with the two of you plus Frankie. Then, we spent some time with Kiyoshi Kurosawa and some of his famous ghosts and hypnotists. Today, though, we're focusing on a filmmaker who is known for his extremes. But first, for today, I'll be Craig Wright, and with me are two people who purport to be Bennett Glace and Jim Hickcox. How are you two doing today?
I'm a little sweaty, but I'm okay.
A little sweaty? Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the talk of needles getting you a little hot
A little
under the
bit,
collar?
yeah.
I'm sorry. We'll do what we can to cool you off. Maybe-
Plus this bed of coals you have me strapped to. But
Hey, you know what we're talking about today, okay? It's method acting.
yeah, gotta get in the right headspace.
You've got your seltzer to cool you down. Just lean into that, Jim. Bennett, how are you doing today?
Despite that spooky chill in the air, I'm actually a little sweaty myself. We're at the sort
I
of
am too now.
spot. We're at the spot. When I jumped on the call initially, I don't know if you noticed, I was like fanning myself with a folded up piece of paper. We're at the point, like temperature wise, where I feel really wasteful to have the AC on. And if I open the window in this room, my cat will try to jump out, and there's no screen. So I'm a little worried about that. So I'm relying on kind of manual cooling at the moment. But excited to talk some Japanese horror. Excited to talk about Takashi Miike, a guy who I feel like his reputation has like preceded him throughout my entire life. I feel like he's been kind of one of the extreme filmmakers. I think you mentioned known for his extremes for as long as I can remember. Certainly one of the films we're talking about, I feel like has been one of those, it's always infamous, always on the list of like most fucked up movies, most too disturbing to watch twice. One of those sort of movies.
Yeah. He's one of the few filmmakers that actually made me feel like gross after a movie. I don't know, Bennett, I think you have seen it, but his Masters of Horror.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty
I think
grim.
it's called.
Yeah.
It was like the only one they did not show in America because it was too gruesome, but it's like, oh my God, like, oh, there are like things going under fingernails, like hooks through jaws, and like, oh my God, that's like not even in the top 5 of grossest things in that episode. But yeah, when he wants to be extreme, he is extreme.
No, it's a shame they didn't air it, because it's probably, that series is a guilty pleasure, but that might be I think it's by far the best episode of Masters of Horror I've seen, just from a directing standpoint, certainly from a visual standpoint. It's the least televisual looking of them. It really looks like it was directed.
Yeah, it's certainly something. So today we're going to be looking at 2 films from Takashi Miike, and I like this matchup for many reasons. We, again, as we did last week with Kiyoshi Kurosawa, we're kind of looking at his masterpiece, and then a later one where he kind of returns to his old ways, I think is a fair first way of saying it. Jim, you want to give us a quick intro into the movie you'll be talking about today?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to talk about it's the easy answer when someone asks about a Takashi Miike movie. It is Audition. I feel like if people know 2 Takashi Miike movies, they're this one and Ichi the Killer.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to say that I enjoyed Ichi the Killer.
Same.
Not because I did it and I'm ashamed, because I didn't. I didn't like it. This was, I think, the first Miike movie I ever saw, which was interesting. I watched it when I was a young man and decided, sort of as you said earlier, Bennett, I decided I never needed to watch it ever again. I was glad I watched it. The like kitty 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 has echoed in my memory for the last 20 years.
Yeah, so scary.
Rewatching it was super fascinating though, because now I've seen, I don't know, 20, 25 of his limitless movies. And there's a bunch of stuff in it that I don't think that is sort of like hallmark Miike that I never would have picked up on the first time, because the elements that grab you so hard. There's a lot of stuff in it that's like kind of weird in a different way than most of the movie is weird, that I never. Anyway, I am happy I rewatched it. Even though I decided a long time ago never to, I'm very glad that I did revisit it.
Well, Bennett, you picked a later movie that we'll just say the word controversy is heavy around it. Why don't you give us a quick intro into the movie you picked and a bit about why you picked this one?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to take a similar approach to the one I took in the Kiyoshi Kurosawa episode. I wanted to pair kind of a heavy hitter, one that you're if you're likely to have heard of any film from the director, you'll have heard of it, with a lesser known one, perhaps a lesser loved one. And so I went to Letterboxd and I went to horror under Miike's films, and I looked around and I watched just about everything they had to offer. Ichi the Killer is actually one of the ones I haven't seen. It's good to know I should avoid it. And,
you have to see it once.
Yeah, Lesson of the Evil, it stuck out to me because it's Miike's kind of distinctly upsetting and distinctly extreme take on sort of a stock type of horror film. The kind of charming killer hiding in plain sight horror film. And I don't love the movie, but I like it more than a lot of movies that do. It does a lot of things that usually, for me, I'm instantly out on a movie. It focuses on a killer who doesn't really face any real obstacles, who is just sort of like a Terminator kind of killing machine throughout the movie. And that, for me, in movies and television, tends to be pretty uninteresting. It is, however, in the way its kind of narrative threads come together, ultimately pretty unusual. I particularly enjoy the flashback segment that we'll talk about. I would love to get a job like the American actor in this movie and just really, really just kind of flatly deliver lines in unaccented English. But yeah, I thought it's an interesting one to pair with Audition too, because Audition is. It's kind of a film that's like a sequel to itself, right? It's like kind of like 2 incredibly different films kind of mashed together. Or, it's known for a sudden like tonal shift. And if you don't know it's coming, it can be real whiplash. And then this is a movie that's kind of like 2 movies existing side by side and like overlapping throughout. So kind of a different way of talking about the tonal mashups that are endemic to his filmography.
I did note, one of the things that I wrote down is that I feel like these 2 movies are exactly the same shape.
I was just going to say, now that you mentioned it.
A lot of his movies aren't, but these two are like really, really very similar in their construction.
Yeah. So Takashi Miike is an important figure in Japanese horror films or Japanese film, really, for many reasons. But the number one thing that comes up with him is extreme violence. But beyond just blood and truly incomparable gore, what are some things that stand out to you about Takashi Miike's style? Because I think it's important to kind of get our bearings on why he's important more than just like he makes blood run, you know?
I mean, I would say, I alluded to sort of the tonal shifts. There's a real kind of irreverent, kind of wacky sense of comedy to even the most kind of visceral scenes in his films. Stuff like Visitor Q really kind of throughout is juxtaposing kind of horror and comedy throughout. It's almost, and I'll get this one in early, almost Lynchian in the sense that it's never totally comedic or totally horrific. Certain of his films, that's the case. I would say, even something like Audition that goes to pretty horrific, like Heights. There's always a weird, disarming sort of, not quite surreal, but just an off quality to the proceedings.
I think part of what makes him important, at least to my brain, but I think culturally, a thing that helps is that he has made 120 movies or something in the last 30 years, right? He's making like 4-ish movies a year, which for me is just exciting to know that someone that's super aspirational, you know. I wish somebody would allow me to make 4 movies a year. Yeah. But I don't know, not a lot of people are working at that speed. So even though I don't know how many of those movies are actually good, I might give a bigger number than one of you necessarily, but 20% maybe generously. But the fact that he's sort of so efficiently creating so much, I think is helpful in terms of making him sort of a known force of industry.
Right. And he began with low budget films. He did a lot of, Yakuza gangster films, and he's done everything. I mean, I don't know if there's a genre he really hasn't covered. Jim, you may know more than me, but he's well-rounded, and he's always going to make a movie that looks good, and there's always going to be something interesting in there.
Yeah, I think that's part of it also, right, is that he does, because he works so fast and so low budget, typically, he definitely has a good sense of how to instill some kind of flair into things. He also, here's the thing that I've probably talked about this times in the past. The big thing that's bad about bad movies is that they're boring. Mm-hmm. And Miike's pretty good most of the time at avoiding that. He's pretty good at taking whatever it is that he's filming and just throwing some stuff into it. So when you're watching it, you're like, oh, there's some stuff.
That's interesting, because I feel like the ones of his that I haven't liked have been strictly based on the content and not like it's presented in a boring way. It's more just like, wow, did I need to see 37 people just have their guts spilled like that? I don't know. I'm sure Ichi the Killer is going to come up, but that's a movie that we've all kind of said, like, see it once. I know a lot of people have said, like, I saw that movie in high school. It made me think a lot of things. Don't know if I ever want to see it again.
Yeah.
I think it is important to say real fast. We don't normally do content warnings, but this is a podcast that covers horror films, so I think you can kind of expect there's going to be some graphic stuff. But the second movie especially, if you are someone who isn't comfortable with, graphic gore, especially involving school shootings, this might not be the podcast for you, and if that's the case, no worries. We'll see you soon.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll be back. It won't be hopefully 9 months this time like last time. Sorry. But yeah, Takashi Miike is often described as an acquired taste. He's a polarizing figure. Given what you've seen of his films, what's your general take on him as a director, and how do you feel about the acquired taste label?
Isn't every taste acquired? I don't know.
That's a fair answer.
I would say some of his checkered reputation is definitely deserved. I mean, I haven't loved everything that I've seen, and I don't know. I mean, I had kind of in my mind, I boxed him in as sort of like an edgelord, maybe like a shock for the sake of shock sort of a guy. And I don't know that he's really beaten those allegations with me over the last few weeks. I would say he definitely does it better than a lot of what I imagine are like his imitators. Like what he's better than most directors of like horror comedy, I think. I don't know. At the very least, by virtue of the fact that he really kind of goes for it when it comes to being willing to be upsetting or being willing to be like truly absurd with the comedy. You know, something like Happiness of the Katakuris. Like I really like.
That's a great one.
All sorts of movies are described as being surprising or like, wow, you'll never imagine what happens in this one. Truly a movie where I was, you know, from beginning to end, like, wow. Which, you know, I don't know. I feel like with a lot of directors who get lumped into that same kind of edgelord box, they have kind of one thing they do over and over again. I don't know, like Michael Haneke for me is like a guy who like has like one trick and like I've seen it and, you know, he's going to do it again and again. Miike, even if you know what to expect as far as the tonal soup and the just the fact that it's going to get extreme, I feel like he's managed to surprise me across the 11 or 12 films that I've seen now, which again I recognize is 10% of his filmography, including none of the Yakuza films, which I guess are kind of where he cut his teeth. I was surprised that Audition seems to have really been like his first horror movie.
I think it is,
or he certainly didn't have a reputation for horror going in.
I think he was mostly a gangster movie guy at the time, right? And then just pulled him in.
So let's pivot into Audition because a lot happens in this movie. We got a lot to talk about. So, Jim, why don't you just give us a quick run through of the basic premise of Audition?
Sure. The basic premise is a sad middle-aged man whose wife died several years ago is urged by his son to get remarried, and it's just like, yeah, you know what, I will. And so he confides in his friend, who's a filmmaker, that he wants to get remarried, and his friend's like, oh, well, we'll just hold an audition. You just list whatever you want, you know, as a wife, as the qualities of the main character, and then we'll have an audition, and we'll actually make a movie. This guy like makes a radio show and is like pitching people to make a movie. It makes Japan seem like a great place to be making media. But he like gets these things off the ground to hold an audition, and then the guy finds a woman that he thinks is perfect for him, and they hit it off really well, and they go on some dates, and she sort of insists that he love her and only her, and then at some point finds out that he has a dog and a son and an ex-wife, and is not happy about that, and so she uses drugs to paralyze him and torture him. And then the movie ends. I'm a little bit doing it a disservice by telling it to you in the way that I would tell a story, because this sort of goes with what Bennett just said about consistent surprise. Both of these movies, and I think a decent amount of Miike's movies, he seems very unconcerned with revealing things to you at the end, right? It's not, I feel like a lot of filmmakers are like, you're never going to know what's happening, and then there's a big twist. And Miike doesn't. He just doesn't do that. You know from maybe minute 30 that the young woman in this movie has a man in a bag in her apartment. And you know that everyone she's talked to in the last several years is dead. So he doesn't really withhold information from you. He kind of lets you know what's going on, but still I think manages to consistently throw you off guard with what's coming next, which I think is a remarkable feat.
Yeah, and he uses those. He uses those red flags in the movie very well. As like, okay, maybe you should look into this, but then it's no.
Yeah. Also, every other character who the main character talks to is like, I don't know about this lady.
Yeah,
and he's like, but I love her.
Yeah, this movie really has brilliant characters in it because, you know, we have a pretty good sense of who Shigeharu is, but then Asami is just kind of like this angel who appears for him, and then it's just like step by step that angelic image is kind of removed. And
I mean, the big thing that people talk about, right, is that, and Bennett sort of alluded to this earlier, but that for 2/3 of the movie, except for these like interludes of sort of insanity, most of the first 2/3 of the movie could almost be a really sleazy romantic comedy. It is paced and set up in a way that is sort of serene almost, and then it's not until the last it's not even in my brain. It's like 45 minutes, but in the movie, I think it was maybe 15. The last 15-ish minutes is this really brutal torture scene where she sticks needles into him and then cuts one of his feet off. She tries to cut both of his feet off, but she's interrupted. But she like kills his dog and then starts torturing him. The rest of the story leads up to it in an elegant way, but it does feel like you're like, oh, the tone of this movie has just shifted drastically.
Yeah. We have the whole first third before we even really get any of those red flags. It's kind of in that second third that they kind of get to be sewn in. So like you said, it's played like an intermittently sleazy kind of romantic comedy. And I like, one of the things I like about it is if you know like the basics of the plot going in, there is, any number of fake outs in the audition sequence, because that goes on for a long time. They talk to a lot of women, and if you just know, one of them is going to turn out to be, like a murderer, you can spend a while kind of like looking for like hints in the conversations and stuff.
That's funny. Yeah.
So how do you feel about Shigeharu as the main character? I mean, are we supposed to assume he's a bad dude for taking advantage of women, or do you feel he's more of a desperate person to trying some sense of peace in his life after tragedy?
Both. He's both of those.
Okay.
Well, both. I mean, I think I like that, true to his kind of melding of tones and genres, Miike kind of has it both ways. He shows us, at his wife's like deathbed to start out. And, it's his son who like encourages him to get back out there, not like his sleazy friend.
And it's a sleazy friend who comes up with the idea to audition women. And he, at the beginning of the audition, his friend's like, are you nervous? And he's like, I feel like a murderer.
Yeah, he kind of acknowledges how creepy it is.
Yeah. Because they're like manufacturing a Weinstein scenario, which is not great.
But I don't know. Like he lets it start out like sweet before it becomes instantly like a casting couch situation, and it very much is. He doesn't shy away from that either. Like one of the women gets like topless in the audition, and again, like that's handled like pretty quickly.
We see a super brief shot of a woman starting to pull down her underwear.
So we have to. Your mind can run wild then with like what the rest of these auditions have been like.
And he like asks women. He's like, "Would you be comfortable going into sex work? Would you do sex scenes?" He's like asking them a lot of pretty invasive questions. The friend is doing all this.
Right. I think that is interesting though, because like I do see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, it's this toxic movie," but it's like,
well, the characters are toxic,
right? But it's like Miike does allow I don't know. It's just an interesting way that he handles it.
I think he knows that they're being terrible.
Right.
I think the movie knows, and I think Shigeharu knows.
So once they meet, they hit it off pretty quickly. They, as I saw an interview where Miike said, "Yes, love leads to misery." Just boom. But what can you tell me about how their relationship unfolds and kind of how they change throughout the film? Because they both undergo a pretty severe metamorphosis in this.
Well, she's sort of secretive, and dramatic irony lies in the fact that like we, knowing that this is a horror movie, know that that's probably a bad sign even before we've seen the guy in the bag. I think she tells him not to follow up on references from her job. Talks about kind of an abusive, kind of sordid childhood, but is again, I think, non-specific enough to discourage him from sort of digging deeper.
Well, he's also kind of choosing not to, right? His friend tries to dig and is like, I'm finding things that scare me. I don't think you should pursue this. And he's actively choosing to ignore that advice.
Well, that's a way of characterizing him, too, right? He's so certain that he's found the perfect woman and the perfect replacement for his wife, and it's from incredibly kind of surface-level detail and from, like, a quick conversation. And I think that's supposed to characterize him as somebody who, I don't know, maybe isn't looking for commitment so much as like a quick answer to like get his son off his back and, have a woman in his life again.
And it does, he the first thing that he like is just in his defense, it's not like he sees her and she's the most beautiful woman and he's like, I have to have, right? The first thing that really attracts him to her is an essay that she wrote about how living is, to be alive is to slowly creep towards death.
Right, yeah.
And he's like, that's
doing something, right? Yeah, she had to like stop playing the piano or something.
Ballet. She did ballet.
Yeah,
until she hurt her hip. She says, although we later find out that she also was like molested, assaulted by her uncle / ballet teacher.
Right, because she was like a promising, dance prospect, and I do like how they unveil her background.
Sure.
My favorite thing about how they do it is the first time we see her in her apartment when she says, "Oh, I was waiting for your call." Do one of you maybe want to just describe her apartment? Because that is one of my favorite moments of characterization in horror.
I guess this is what I mean, because this is like maybe 20-25 minutes in. We don't know there's a guy in the bag until the phone rings, which is another 10 or 15 minutes later. But the first time we see it, it's clear there's something off, right? Yes. Where it's just a totally empty apartment except for a giant burlap sack and a telephone on the floor. And we see her in it 2 or 3 times, and every time she's just sitting slumped against a wall with her head down and her hair like ring style draped over her face, just sitting absolutely motionless waiting for the phone to ring. Like she's been shut down until the phone rings. It is very off-putting.
When the bag moves, I loved watching this. I had a friend come over and the bag moved, and he actually was like, "Oh my god!" jumped out of his chair. I was like, "What is that?"
It's and I had a very different relationship, I guess, Jim, to this movie than you did. I think I talked about this last year when we talked about Black Christmas. There was this Bravo list of like the 100 scariest movie moments, and Audition was on there, specifically the guy in the bag moving and then the torture sequence at the end. It was probably like in the top like 20. It was definitely like the highest rated Japanese film. And I put off watching it for years. I was like, both because I was like, I really don't want to watch a guy getting like needles stuck in him and getting his foot cut off with like a wire. Not for me. And also because I figured like, well, if I know that's coming, then what is the movie? And I would say, to Miike's immense credit, I think even when I knew the twists and that jump scare, the guy moving in the bag, I knew all of this was coming. I still found it incredibly affecting. And in the time since, I've seen God knows how many movies God knows how many movies that involve people. No, that involve, well, not just the bag thing, that involve people getting like limbs cut off or getting tortured in some respect. And I gotta say, this is still one of the most like squirm-inducing of the sort of torture sequences.
I haven't gone through all the Saws as you have, but I've done one
Saw. Someone who's seen all 10 Saws.
I've done one Saw and one Hostel, and I don't know, some other stuff I'm sure where people get limbs cut off. And I don't know, there's like a camp to most of those movies that, despite this movie has a bunch of, as I say, Hallmark Miike camp weirdness sprinkled across it, just little touches, but it's still, most of the movie is so grounded that when she's even just putting the acupuncture needles into his belly, which is what an acupuncturist does, so presumably it shouldn't be that upsetting. It's so upsetting. And then when she cut his foot, I almost can't watch when she's cutting his foot off.
Terrible. Yeah, and I don't know, like his weird like touches in a lot of other movies that would be disarming to the point that it doesn't become, it ceases to be affecting, or they would underlie it. They do this in the Saw movies a lot. They'll underlie it with a lot of like riffs that just sort of like they take you out of the sequence. But I don't know, really just watching her going with that wire and her sort of cooing the word deeper as she pushes the needles in, incredibly creepy, and just I don't know, the sort of odd touch that a lot of filmmakers go for and whiff badly. Like a lot of people think they're doing that, or think they're doing the Reservoir Dogs thing, and they're by using like ironic music cues, and we'll talk about that in the next film. I think the next film is one where it really he fails in ironizing violence.
Jim, I find it interesting that you said you couldn't really watch when the foot's being cut off, because I wanted to open this episode with needles, because this is like the only needle scene I can like watch, because it's so well done. It's like it's basically this ASMR scene where she's like, "Oh, I'm hurting you. I'm hurting you." Yeah. But like I can't look away during that movie. Like my weird thing is when I see needles in a movie, like I can't do movies where people shoot up heroin, because I'm just like, oh my god, nope, needles bad. Needles.
Also, Craig, also heroin is bad also. For the listeners, just putting it out there for the kids on the other end.
Drugs are bad, Jim. But needles visually are scarier. But no, I mean, I just had this weird thing where my left Achilles tendon like goes numb when I see needles on screen, and I just like can't move. But this one was just like, I cannot look away. Like, where is this going? Oh man. But
also, she sticks them in and then she leans onto them.
Yeah.
Oh, so awful.
Yeah.
It's such a well constructed sequence because you really like she tells him like what's gonna happen and then does it, and it like I don't know, you can like anticipate the whole thing, and you're just seeing enough too. It's not like just watching like needles going in or just watching him react.
Well,
it's really,
a lot of
like,
it is close on her
constructed.
face.
Yeah,
you're like his view, I guess, of her sticking needles into it under his eye.
Yeah.
Very upsetting.
I will say Saw 10, sorry to spoil Saw 10 listeners, features a trap where someone has to sever a limb with one of those wires that people use to cut clay. Yeah, very, very upsetting in Saw 10 as well.
I'm glad you've seen it. Okay. Because I think that whole genre of like people being slowly dissected largely starts after this, right? I think this is... Anyway, yeah. I'm sure the Saw people had seen this and were like, well, we can't get too close to it, right?
And like Eli Roth in Hostel for sure talks about the influence of this. I think Miike shows up in one of the Hostel movies. I think might have like a cameo as one of the. Don't quote me on that, but I think he's like one of the guys you see as like a guy who's like a killer at the Hostel place.
I bet he wouldn't be an expensive cameo. I bet he's like a plane flight in a hotel and a few $100. I just want to briefly. I've mentioned a couple of times the sort of like Hallmark Miike bits that we see, which I just want to call out a couple of them, which are at one point we learn that at a murder scene from Asami earlier, they found a dismembered body and there were 3 extra fingers and an extra ear and an extra tongue.
Yeah.
Which is such a delightful story. But then we see, presumably in Shigeharu's imagination, we see them all and the tongue's just lying on the floor flopping like a dead fish.
I love that, yeah.
Which is, it's like, it's weirder than most of the rest of the movie. Also, he at one point finds the former abusive, I think he's an uncle, right? / or stepfather. He's some kind of connection, and her former ballet teacher, and he's wearing someone else's feet on his feet. We just see that he has dead sewn up feet on the bottom of his legs.
Aren't they wooden planks? Because he like lifts them.
There's planks on the bottom of them.
Okay.
Oh, maybe that's what's holding them on. Maybe there's little like stilts under them. I saw that there were planks underneath.
I could be wrong.
Both of those sequences, both of those like investigative sequences, I was struck how much they look like spontaneous combustion. The Dutch angles, the sort of like blue and yellow lighting.
Yeah, they do get weird.
I don't know. Maybe he's a fan. We know Kiyoshi Kurosawa's a big fan. Maybe Takashi Miike is a fan of spontaneous combustion as well.
Yeah. They should be if they're not.
As anyone who's seen any movie should be.
Yeah.
So the torture scene is the most famous, but I think my favorite part of this movie is, after they spend the night together for the first time, she says, you will love me and only me. And then he has this like hallucination. And I will say the first time I saw this movie, I honestly could not tell if that portion was 5 minutes or 40. Like I've never seen a film that seemingly bent time like that. Because there's just so much happens, but nothing is like linear. It's just like he's just finding all these things that are happening, and it's just, they keep showing like replaying scenes that have already happened, but they're slightly different. And then
they're saying different lines, but in the same space.
Yeah, and like, they'll be in a restaurant, and it's like everyone's there, and then no one's there, and then his dead wife is there, and it's just like, what is happening right now?
And then Asami says something, and it cuts to him, and it cuts back to her, and she's a child.
Yeah. I mean,
and then she's puking in a dog bowl in a space that he's never been, but he's standing there.
Yeah, and then the man in the bag eats from that bowl. And, oh my God. Like, this is Bennett, I think this was the first Miike movie I saw as well, and like that to me was like, okay, no matter what else this guy has done, this is a masterwork. It's just like that movie is like, if all of his other movies suck, he's still got something.
It is so bizarre because it starts off feeling like things that could be happening, and then it just sort of slowly devolves into things that are clearly impossible, but even within the context of the movie, like, it's in his head, but it includes elements that there's no way he could know.
Yeah.
It like continually becomes more off-putting and confusing as it goes, and it does feel like it could be literally any amount of time.
I still don't know how long this movie is. I assume it's around 90 minutes, right?
I would guess.
No, it's like an even 2 hours almost. It's like 155. Really? Yeah.
See, I have no idea.
Yeah, no, I agree. it gets that sort of hallucinatory, like dreamlike state, and the fact that like it could be a few minutes or like an hour better than most quote unquote dreamlike sequences I've seen in films. And then when it finally ends, it's so upsetting to find him there on the floor. I think the barfing in the dog bowl and the gusto with which he laughs it up is one of the more like benign, for a fairly benign image. Again, like I've seen people's eyeballs poked out. I've seen all sorts of crazy shit in movies. Someone puking in a bowl and eating it isn't that crazy, but the fucking way he goes at it is so alarming.
And doesn't he say yummy too?
Something like that, yeah. Although he doesn't have a tongue, I don't remember how.
He certainly looks grateful.
Yes.
And one thing I'll say though, and I don't like how when he notices the guy is like missing his fingers and like foot and tongue or whatever, that it shows like the flashback. Oh, it's that guy. That was very like M. Night Shyamalan third act.
He's a little worried that you're dumb.
That you forgot about that.
Yeah.
You forgot about this crazy thing that happened like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
That this guy certainly wouldn't have forgotten
and it's
about.
Such a specific list, 3 fingers, an ear, and a tongue. You're like, yeah, no, I know.
1, 2, 4. There they are.
Yeah. He holds up his hand. It's super close up, and we see 3 fingers missing. And you don't need to. We remember.
But I think, so many people try to do the fever dream sequence. And I just think Rob Zombie camera shaking in your face when I think of that. But this one, it's shot so just everything is fairly stationary, and it's just it's the things unfolding in front of the camera that are what are absolutely bonkers and not how it's shot. And I really like how he does that.
Yeah, because I think it's shot just the same as most of...
Yeah,
like Bennett pointed out earlier, right? The investigative sequences have a slightly different aesthetic to them than everything else, but the dream sequence just looks like most of the rest of the movie. It's just weird stuff happening. It's like wrong events being presented as though they were normal, which is not, I think, the usual way to approach that.
No, I would say it reminds me of we talked about how Kiyoshi Kurosawa will kind of seed supernatural stuff into kind of benign settings and kind of wait for you to spot the ghost. And I like the just sort of straightforward transition from increasingly surreal scenes. Yeah, because again, you could see so many filmmakers going the wrong way with that and really kind of larding on the creepy effects. And he knows he doesn't need to. He trusts the content on screen to have the visceral impact.
Yeah. Which is, to be fair, a little out of character for him. Usually he's but also there should be a geyser of blood.
I was going to say, certainly Lesson of Evil takes the opposite approach.
Yeah.
So that is something I wanted to bring up because there is pretty extreme violence in this movie, but it's not presented as a, as you said, the blood geyser is erupting.
Yeah.
It's more just I think a big part of it is because the characters are so good together that once the torture is happening, it has just that extra emotional closeness that, when it's, Ichi the Killer, when it's, Ichi goes in and kills 40 people in a gang in 35 seconds. And it's just it turns into an ice skating rink where there's large intestines just sprawled out. And, it's just kind of okay, yes, that's a thing that just happened, but I don't know. I think the violence in Audition is so much more effective because it's coming from a place of this is pointed. And, okay.
And I mean, I could see a version of this, right, where Miike does, when she's sawing the leg, there's a mist of blood jetting up into her face, right? Which I think that's kind of the kind of thing he was doing first in his gangster movies, and then he sort of carried through his career as this sort of cartoonishness to his violence. And the fact that he holds himself back from doing that in at least this part, right? Like a man wearing another man's dead feet and a guy in a sack, right? Those impulses are there. But for the sort of this big torture scene at the end, he just lets it be sort of as close to what the world is like if you're cutting a foot off, I assume, as possible. And it is more upsetting for that, I think.
Yeah, I think plenty of filmmakers have talked about how it's so much more effective to have a pain that's relatable, pain that you can relate to, and that this needle pricks as the kind of primary form of the torture is pretty easy to relate to and pretty easy to imagine yourself in. Because again, we both said we've accidentally been punctured or intentionally been occasionally punctured by other people, and it's I don't know, it's unpleasant, and you can use your imagination and be like, oh, what if this was 10 times worse? What if this was
what if it was in my lower eye?
Yeah. Right, what if it was oh god, that's the worst for me. Eyelid trauma for me is where I have to tune out.
We've mentioned that when most people think of Takashi Miike, this is probably the first film, or maybe second, that comes to mind. But his reputation still is like he's the violent guy. So I'm just curious how you feel this film affected his overall reputation as a director throughout his career, because he got bloodier. He certainly did. But if this is the movie that people are pointing to saying, like, this is the hyper-violent director, like, do you feel that this is an accurate representation of his extremes?
Yeah, nothing I've seen so far suggests to me that he doesn't deserve the reputation for extremity in his content, and I would say this is like a good calling card movie. It's certainly the best of the ones I've seen, and it definitely has a lot of Jim, like you've said, a lot of what are his hallmarks. I do think, though, that the conversation, or as is often the case, the marketing and conversation around this film doesn't really do it or him any favors, just in the sense that it really foregrounds blanking on her name, but the fact that she is in the apron on the poster for like the film, any imagery you'll see from the film is her in the apron with like the wire. I feel like that does the film and Miike and the viewer who is potentially looking to go in cold a disservice. I think it's easy for the synopsis to just allude to a woman maybe not being what she seems without making it incredibly clear, like, yeah, she kidnaps and tortures this guy. So, I do think it's not just given him a reputation for, extreme violence. It's maybe given people, a pre-expectation that there's going to be something truly horrific, something, something mutilation related, something torture related, something really, beyond the pale. Yeah. So, either you kind of go in and you're waiting for that to happen. That's your kind of like, when do they get to the fireworks factory? Or, people who are explicitly looking for that are, especially keen on his films. And then, people who, for whom that's an instant turnoff might not give something like this a chance, which, again, I think for its reputation as an especially disturbing film and for how visceral we find the torture sequence, it's really not all that goopy or gruesome a film. I think a lot of people who think of themselves as not being horror people could find a lot to enjoy in the film.
Yeah,
it's totally ultimately pretty artfully constructed. The climax, the extended violent climax is, I don't know. There's much more going on there than I think in Lesson of the Evil, which may just be there to shock.
Yeah, it's the torture scene is hard to sit through, but it also is a relatively small part of the movie, time wise, even though it's the only thing anyone talks about. You're right that I think it probably is disserviced by, and Miike generally maybe is a little disserviced by his reputation being ahead of him in the way that it is. I don't know that this is true, but I think I've gone into every Miike movie I've seen fully unaware of what was going to happen. I watched this one. I had no idea. It was like, a year or two after it had come out, it was just like, here's a Japanese horror movie. Okay, let's go, Mm-hmm. Because this came out sort of in the wake of Ringu. And so I think it was my same friends who had found this and brought it to me. And I think I watched this, and then I watched Ichi the Killer. And I think on the strength of this one, I still sort of continued to seek out Miike after Ichi. Here's my answer in terms of Miike extremes, right, is that he's known as an extreme kind of fella. But I think there are two different ways that he sort of approaches that. And I think Audition is a really good example of one, but I think it's the one that he exercises less. I think he is more often, when people are talking about the extreme elements of Miike, they're talking about like Gozu, right, where a guy like kicks a chihuahua into a glass window, and then an adult human is born out of the vagina of another adult human, right? It's the stuff where really like extreme weird, or extreme, like I mentioned earlier, like explosions of blood, like cartoonish, overwhelming things, I think is what people generally mean when they talk about the extreme elements of Miike. And on that level, this movie doesn't really, there's bits, but it doesn't really serve that up in the way that a lot of his movies do.
as baroque as the killing gets, it doesn't go to any like aggressively wacky, any Reddit territory, any what might be called Reddit territory.
So Audition is the rare film that is kind of reviewed as both misogynistic and feminist. I found it interesting reading reviews from different time periods, because when it came out, most people were like, well, yeah, it's like this, misogynistic movie, but like she gets even in the end. But then more recently, it's kind of taken a turn where it's like she's a feminist icon. She's taken down the patriarchy, and like I don't know if I'd go that far. It's like I'm just curious.
I wouldn't call it too overtly either of those things. I don't think it's super. I think the main character is doing a very misogynistic thing. And I think his friend is pretty overtly misogynistic. I think that the characters are carrying misogyny with them. And I think there are elements that are Japanese culture 1999 that I can't purport to fully understand. A lot of things where like he's like, I'll introduce my son to this woman after I've proposed to her, right? There's like, which feels insane to me, but like clearly makes sense to them. So surely there are other things that also I don't get. But it feels like they are doing a misogynistic thing, but he's doing it like quote unquote for the right reasons, right? He's not trying to just sleep with all these audition girls. He's trying to find someone he loves, and he thinks he does. So there is some misogyny you can point at, but I don't think it's like so deep that you can condemn the whole movie based on it. But also, she has no feminist motivation for anything that she's doing as expressed, right? It's, I mean, I don't know. If people want to claim her as an icon, then good for them, But I don't see her that way necessarily. She seems like she's more of just a serial killer.
Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely means for us to read, see a lot of misogyny in the behavior of kind of the two main guys. And I think kind of Twilight Zone, Tales of the Crypt nature of this is that like he's, it's comeuppance for his misogyny.
Sure.
I would agree with Jim. Yeah, I don't know. I think like calling her like a feminist icon is elite, because like her rejection of like the patriarchy as evidenced by this guy is purely like individual, right? It's not there's not like any kind of broader men do this in general messaging. And yeah, while I would say that like Miike means to set up this whole situation as a way of giving our lead his comeuppance, I do think as is often the case, because he kind of leaves it so ambiguous. I don't know. It's very easy to see misogynists watching this movie and seeing it as fully a movie about, women being crazy, right?
Sure.
I think there's plenty of the kind of, people who saw this on the list of like 50 most fucked up movies, watched it and then had that reading. A lot of people, honestly, probably not people as smart as you or I or you, Craig, any of us.
I'm the dumb one here.
Or any of you listeners, but a lot of people do probably watch the movie and go like, wow, he didn't deserve this. Good Lord. Come on.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked, because like a lot of the early reviews, like people were saying like, "Oh, it's better to be single than dead." Yeah, but it's like,
really?
Yeah, like so I don't. Yeah,
wow.
I think it lands somewhere more in the middle, and I think it's more of an intentionally muddied answer, because it's not supposed to be like she's an icon and he's an asshole. It's more like he's trying to do something, maybe came at it the wrong way. She goes too far, like cutting off people's feet.
She overreacts a lot. She's like, you have a picture of your ex-wife, and therefore, right, you have loved someone else, which is like, I don't know, monogamy times 12 in a way that is insane. But also, just to push back a little bit on this, because she's not ideologically driven, right? She's being driven by individual humans not loving her enough, including one lover who was another woman, which sort of, I think, feels like at least a muddying of the idea of her having some kind of feminist ideology. Not that a feminist can't kill another woman. I don't want to put anyone in a box. Just a burlap sack.
There we go. You can still breathe and have some nice soup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's always interesting to see how reactions of films change over time, because,
Sure.
especially with someone like Miike, where it is a lot of extreme things happening, just how culture has shifted since 1999.
Sure.
I was 5 when this movie came out, so it's like, yeah,
whatever,
world's a little different now. But yeah, I think we're probably good to take a quick little break here, unless either of you have any closing thoughts on Audition before we head on over to Lesson of the Evil. Anything standing out?
Yeah, just meet your next partner in a library.
But you're supposed to be quiet.
Yeah. So you can whisper at each other. That's romantic.
Okay.
If you know this movie as just sort of the poster, as just sort of a woman in a leather apron looking menacing, I'd say give it a shot, because even if you know the story beats, even if you know where it's going, all the torture sequences that we've just described, trust me, they are more upsetting when you see them than hearing us sort of detail them.
And
That's
it's
true.
just as shocking on repeat viewings too. Like, yeah.
You never get used to seeing somebody get a shot in the tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this movie does not lose its edge. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back to talk about Lesson of the Evil. Much like Kiyoshi Kurosawa in the last episode, Takashi Miike is another director who says he is prolific simply for the reason that filmmaking in Japan is a job, and money is nothing like it is in Hollywood. So he says you make films as a continuous career and as a source of income. As mentioned, he has directed well over 100 films. I checked last night, and IMDb says 115, or he's credited as director on. It may be 116 by the time this comes out. I think his style does demand viewers will not love everything he does.
Sure.
So I'm just kind of curious before
His style and his range, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, he's, like I said, he's done everything. So I'm just kind of curious before getting into Lesson of the Evil, what are some of your favorites of his films that we haven't maybe talked about yet, and maybe what's your kind of your borders, like what are some you weren't quite sold on as well?
I was like pretty into him 15 years ago, so I've watched a bunch of the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. Fudo, the new generation, was a big one for me for a minute. Gozu I really liked. Visitor Q I really liked. I actually just watched earlier this year, he made a Korean TV show called Connect that I enjoyed. It was like not the kind of thing that I normally watch, but I still enjoyed it.
Okay.
Happiness of the Katakuris. It's hard because there are so many. I'm trying to like skim through them in my brain. Oh. Happiness of the Katakuris is so genius, but the like claymation demon from Happiness of the Katakuris, I like lost into another movie for a while, and I had to watch it a couple more times before I could remember that that's all one piece.
Yeah.
The last third of 13 Assassins, I think, is amazing.
Okay.
The first 2/3 has some stuff in it that is very hard for me to watch. Yakuza Apocalypse is a super fun one. The ones that I haven't super resonated with are the first 2/3 of 13 Assassins. 13 Assassins. Ichi the Killer is tough for me. Honestly, this next one we're going to talk about, I don't know that I'll ever watch it again.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Anyway, those are the ones that stuck with me, I think.
Cool. Yeah. Bennett, what about you?
I have kind of, a different relationship with Miike's work. I had seen a few before kind of planning on doing them for this series. I'd seen Audition. I'd seen the episode of Masters of Horror. Again, we talked about this a little in the Kiyoshi Kurosawa episode too. For a time, kind of post-Ring, particularly post like the remake of The Ring, there was this kind of glut of like extreme Asian horror, and he was definitely, the sort of guy who was talked about in Hushed Tones. I think that episode of Masters of Horror in particular, that was like hard to find for a while. Now you can find it on Tubi. I know for me that was like a kind of a holy grail for a while. Like, wow, if it's more fucked up than Incident on a Mountain Road, it's gotta be crazy. But having watched now like 10 of his films over the last couple of weeks, focusing mostly on the horror, I want to say I'm interested to see to dip into the Yakuza stuff, as well as some of his more historical dramas. I know he's got a remake of Harakiri, which is maybe like as like prestige as he's gone. I will say I would echo that Happiness of the Katakuris really kind of blew me away. It's one I had kind of resisted from the way it's presented. I was like, oh, is this going to be like... Because, I don't know, I can run hot and cold on, like, aggressive wackiness, and that really is continually surprising.
It could be an insufferable movie.
Yeah.
But it manages over, like... And he really is a guy who lives in the runtime that I usually consider the dead zone. Like,
It's true.
Both movies we're talking about are, like, right around 2 hours. Most of the movies I watched I found were, like, around the hour 40, 2:10 runtime.
They're all a little longer than they ought to be.
Yeah, and he still manages to come up with like kind of surprises throughout, and I don't know, maybe I don't find them as thrilling as he might with something like Blessed of Evil, but I'll say some other ones that I didn't really love. His One Missed Call. I first came to that story through the American remake. I think his original is just okay. It's kind of wild that I guess they figured they couldn't let that premise go. Yeah. One that you had recommended, Craig, which we'll talk about having some kind of interesting parallels with Lesson of the Evil, was As the Gods Will. There was definitely a lot about kind of Japanese culture that I didn't understand about that, like the nature of most of the games that are kind of played throughout. But I will say, a movie that really goes there, and again, a movie that was continually surprising, and I liked how it was kind of organized kind of similarly to the Saw movies or to the Escape Room movies, if you've seen those. I didn't really like Visitor Q. Visitor Q for me was maybe number one on the all-time list of like, boy, I really hope nobody walks in right now as I'm watching this from like the fucking get-go. And then by the time we got to like lactation and stuff at the end, I was a little like, all right, let's move it along. And I unfortunately, it's like a boring answer. I think Audition really is the best. It's kind of like, calling Kira Kurosawa's best, but it deserves its reputation. But this film, Lesson of the Evil, I picked initially because I thought we might be doing a 3-part one, and I thought, well, let's do kind of a wackier one in the middle, and then 2 of these kind of movies with sort of bifurcated structures, on either side. And, I like this one because, I find this one to be kind of it. I really love this movie, and I stand by everything all the characters do.
Worthy of conversation, Bennett.
I like this one because it's like a Miike extreme take on kind of like a stock type of horror movie. This, kind of charming serial killer hiding in plain sight. It's, your American Psychos, your Dexters. Like, this is the sort of thing that if it didn't culminate in an hour of children being killed at school, you could see it being remade for, like, American audiences.
Yes.
Because people really eat this shit up, this sort of, charming anti-hero. I mean, not that he's an anti-hero here, but you know what I mean? People love blurring the lines between anti-hero and just full-on villain in their entertainment. And I guess initially he's, he starts out sort of doing this sort of Dexter thing of, like, it's really more of a Hannibal Lecter thing, honestly, of him, like, addressing, like, faux pas by, like, killing people in, like, crazy ways.
Before we get too into this, Bennett, let's back up a bit, because we haven't really talked about this movie yet. We somehow made it through one section of a show without talking about the second movie first. Good job, everyone.
Such discipline today.
I know, it's crazy. So, Bennett, we've kind of talked about the rough idea of where this film goes. Maybe do you want to give us a bit about, the who's and what's are going on in this movie? Because this is another one that kind of plays as 2 separate filmic ideas. I'm not going to say 2 movies, but like there's a part 1 and a part 2 for sure.
Yeah. There's definitely a part 1 and a part 2, and there's sort of a long kind of violent sequence toward the end. I'll say that the kind of hints that something is amiss are there right from the very beginning, as opposed to in Audition, where they're kind of sewn in kind of more and more often as the kind of first act winds down. So the film is about a guy named Hasumi, who is an English teacher, really well liked by his students. He's relatively new in town, and he's the kind of teacher you wish you had. Really brings the lessons to life, makes learning fun, and basically stuff. He starts to kind of raise suspicion. The physics teacher at the school, who is shall we say, like more of the likely candidate to be a creep. At least that's how he's sort of positioned. And he's the same guy who plays the serial killer in Sion Sono's Cold Fish, which seemed like maybe a fun bit of kind of red herring casting. So he starts to raise some suspicions, and people start to investigate him. But pretty early on in the film, we know that he is a killer, a total like antisocial maniac who is going to stop at nothing. There's a flashback that opens the film of a kid killing his parents, or it's implied that he's about to kill his parents, and that is presented sort of like a non sequitur, and then we're kind of gradually, as we learn more about Asumi, meant to infer that was him. And basically, he kind of like intervenes in stuff that's going on in the school, like bullying, cheating. There's a teacher having an affair with a student. And he basically, like I said, in kind of Dexter type fashion, is like killing people involved in these sort of school happenings. And we get kind of snippets of his school life and snippets of his real life, and it's gradually revealed that he's hallucinating and living this kind of intense kind of fantasy life, inspired somewhat by Norse mythology, which never really gelled for me. Again, maybe that's like clearer if you've read the novel or the manga, but and it's and I think, much like Audition, there are some kills that are pretty visceral and pretty like interestingly staged. I think it's a pretty compelling lead performance. This is sort of a stock type of character, but I think he plays it pretty well. And then there are some kind of eccentric choices in how some of that background information is meted out that I sort of enjoyed. We get a flashback to Hasumi's life in the United States when he met a partner in crime briefly. And the way that's handled, the sort of aesthetic of that flashback really was quite intriguing. And then, as we've alluded to, the second half of the film is basically him realizing he's trapped and deciding to just kill everybody in the school. And it's this sort of long sequence of him just kind of going around killing people in the school. It's like a... Have you seen the movie The Guest? It's kind of similar to that, but with like more people getting killed. Funny. Just that's like a Halloween party at a school at the end, and certainly aesthetically recalls that sequence or predicts that sequence, I guess.
So between Audition and this film, Miike made obviously like dozens
80
of
other movies.
Yeah. But what I've read based on the reviews of Lesson of the Evil is before this, Miike had really been doing a lot of TV work and many like commissioned films. And he was kind of a director for hire where he, you need a director, he'll get it done, he'll do something interesting at the very least. But everyone was pretty happy that Lesson of the Evil was a chance for him to basically be himself as a director. And then, a lot of people are praising it for being a hyper-violent film again because it's what he's, made his name on. Do you feel this film is a return to form for him, or is it more of an attempt to recreate past successes?
I didn't read it as either. This is just me putting my own baggage onto the movie. But for me, to reference something Bennett said earlier, this movie almost felt like it was doing Michael Haneke Funny Games, where it... let me rewind slightly, like the killers in Funny Games. And I went into this movie totally unaware. You said you were maybe going to talk about it, and I was like, great, I'll watch that when I haven't seen it. And so I went into it knowing nothing, and experientially, it starts off seeming like it's a movie about, as you say, a charismatic serial killer, and then there were very clear people who were set up to take him down, and then halfway through the movie he murders them, and then you're like, oh well, maybe there are some other people who are sort of primed as like the backup people, and then he almost immediately murders them too, and then if you're me, you're like, I don't understand what this movie is that I'm watching. Which it's been done very sedately, right? But there's like visual flair. There's like that scene when he murders the physics teacher. We're like on that train and we're seeing through the doorway into the other train. That there's a lot of really beautiful stuff happening. Sort of Miike flair. But then it's not until that flashback that you mentioned to Harvard where we're like in a building in Japan, and then suddenly outside the window is a video of the American flag while he's talking to some guy in English we've never heard before, and then we're just on Harvard campus wearing Harvard sweatshirts or whatever, carrying buckets and buckets of blood, right? And suddenly there's this weird visual escalation, and then from there the movie just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating until it becomes clear near the end that it's just a guy murdering every member of a high school class with a shotgun, right? At which point I was like, I don't want to be watching this anymore. But it was super unclear to me what kind of movie it was. But it definitely felt like it ends up being sort of a slasher movie, right? Where it's, instead of like a Michael Myers monster, it's like a Michael Myers' mom, just somebody who wants to murder a bunch of people. But he is just sort of an unkillable machine going around murdering these kids. But it's shot in a way where it's in this like handcrafted Halloween fun fair, and there are again like geysers of blood shooting out of things, and it feels cartoonish and joyous, the visual language of it all, but it's so appalling experientially that it really feels like it's trying to be like, you like this because you are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree there, and it's definitely the least interesting part of the movie for me. Not just because of how just on its face unpleasant it is to see a guy killing a bunch of kids. Because I mentioned this up top in talking about how I'd say I like this film more than some other unstoppable killer entertainments. Like I like this more than like Netflix's like House of Cards. Another example I would hold up as like our villainous protagonist like has no obstacles entertainment. Because watching him sort of slowly dispatch the sort of investigators, his the physics professor, the couple of students who are onto him, watching him dispatch them over the first like hour, 10 minutes is again, even if there's no real threat, it's pretty entertaining. And I think in particular that kill where he's got that sort of like hot iron, he's got the kid's face like duct taped, incredibly upsetting stuff, and again really like well staged. And in these sequences too, in comparison to the end of the film, he doesn't show you all that particularly much. It's pretty, besides the flashback and the buckets of blood, it's pretty sedate. It's pretty suggestive. I had heard, Craig, in listening to kind of podcasts about Miike and about this film in particular, people refer to this as sort of a return to form. And yeah, I know I'm more inclined to think of it as him being maybe like reflecting on his reputation or something like that, and then Jim doing maybe a little bit of well, is this what you want? Seems like people ate it up though. It made like $30 million at the Japanese box office, which I don't know if that's like a ton of money for a film to be making, but like I don't know, whenever you hear besides China, whenever you hear about the money movies made elsewhere, it sounds like a ton. It does not sound like a lot of money compared to the US box office. So I don't know, that to me sounds like it could have been a hit.
I would say though it would probably appeal unmorally, like without sort of that self-reflection, to people who love him for things like Ichi the Killer, right? Because it is that same sort of glorification of what is fundamentally upsetting violence, rather than which I know that's a really ridiculous line for me to be drawing, that like sometimes it's fun to watch a bunch of people be murdered and sometimes it's really upsetting to watch a bunch of people be murdered, but this one, for whatever reason, it may just be his proximity to them, right? Because we mentioned as this feels connected to As the Gods Will, where presumably every 12th grader in the entire world, except for maybe a few hundred, is obliterated, is much easier to watch.
Much easier to watch because it's happening, by supernatural means, and having this like beloved teacher do it is uniquely upsetting.
They all know him, they see him, and they're like, "Oh, it's you," and then he just shoots them. It's also he's just shooting them in the chest with a shotgun, just over and over again.
Hasumi is an interesting character because even when he's helping like a student navigate what to do about a sexual assault and blackmail case, he still has that dark aura about him. Sure. And I never quite trusted him, I just never felt like he's like he clearly holds morals in high regards, but he doesn't quite exude those himself, I'll say. But I'm curious, do you find him to be a sympathetic character at any point in the film?
No,
not in the slightest. And it's maybe I've seen too many movies that like the second there's someone who's this like slick, I'm like, well, they're a fucking murderer. Yeah. Obviously, they've got something to hide. And he's always too. And again, I don't know, maybe it's like a cultural difference. He's always very, even before he's sleeping with one of the students, he's very like handsy. He's always like tossing their hair. Yeah. And obviously, I think the teachers make much of the fact that he suggests like jamming the cell phones. I think the teachers are very affronted by the notion of like breaking the law to investigate the students, even though he says like, well, it's bad policy to let them know we distrust them, which I thought was interesting. I don't know. Maybe it was different when you were in school, Jim. You're older than I am a little bit, but like I think probably even the more case, I think distrusting the students was very much the policy. Sure. It was very much the
that's like the authoritarian stance. Yeah.
No, I never felt him. I never found him like remotely sympathetic, and I felt like he was like honestly like as much. I felt like he was playing like a charming guy in a way that like obviously he would turn out to be a serial killer. Yeah. I thought it was interesting how the physics teacher articulates how there's something off about him by saying like he's like a charming, handsome guy who's like never made me feel bad or something, which I thought was like an interesting way of saying like there's just something off here. He's not really like this sort of guy.
Yeah, because the kid's like, what made you suspect something? And he was like, well, I'm a jerk. And when people are too good, I feel like I get mad at them, and I wasn't mad at him.
He is an interesting character.
Yeah, I like that guy. I was sad he hung himself on a subway car.
So that's another thing. I mean, Hasumi, he's a gifted killer, we'll say, but he always makes everything look like it's a suicide.
Yeah. He's just followed by a rash of suicides everywhere he goes.
Yeah, and like that is why the physics teacher gets killed, because he's telling the cops, like, listen, this guy came from a school where there were 4 suicides. Connect the dots. And they're just like, nah, man, this guy's handsome.
Yeah.
Throughout the first half, though, there isn't too much violence. The first kill doesn't take place for, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 minutes. It's more focused on the school scandals before it really turns the page. But once that descent into violence begins, there are no breaks.
It's like we, the viewer, are the ones slipping on a banana peel.
I wonder if it's best to get to the second half by first talking about... You mentioned he has this weird flashback to the U.S. where we find out some of his backstory. And I think it's interesting that we have Audition as the pairing for this, because it, to me, feels like Miike's trying to maybe not emulate the structure of Audition, but he's definitely kind of doing a similar thing where it's like, here's this like narrative dump in the middle where it's like, yeah, he was this murderer and he had his partner named Clay who was just kind of like, I like killing. You know?
The worst actor
That's
I've
a
ever
good
seen.
Clay. That was a pretty good
I would love to be one of
Clay.
these white guys in an Asian movie. Good Lord.
But what stands out to you about that little interjection? Because I don't even know if it's like a scene. It's just kind of like, here's a few minutes of background that is kind of random, but a lot happens.
I feel like it's just there to clarify that he's not killing for fun, right?
Yeah, is that supposed to make him more sympathetic than Clay, I guess? Yeah, that's an interesting question. What is the point of drawing that distinction there?
We're just giving the shape, right? Where they're like, he's killing because he thinks what he's doing is good, right? He like has some sort of moral imperative that he understands and believes in that probably relates to Odin somehow, that he's trying to enact. That's what I got from it, because he's mad at Clay for liking to kill people, right? He like...
That's why he ends up like killing him, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's clear that he like is okay engaging in the activities he engages in the name of something greater, because he also sleeps with that student in the name of getting access to like student message boards. Yeah. Because otherwise he finds it appalling when teachers sleep with students. And presumably he doesn't like it when people murder other people.
I guess, yeah, it was a kind of a way to emphasize that there is something deeper to the killing here. It also, and this was maybe like a necessity for like, I don't know how familiar Japanese audiences would have been with the song we hear playing throughout. We hear the German version of it from Three Penny Opera, but it's
like
a song that
4
would inspire Mac the Knife. Yeah, we hear a bunch of versions, and in the flashback, Clay says like, this is the American version of that German song you like, or something like that.
Which they already translated it for us once, right? One of my notes was I was so glad they were translating the lyrics, because I don't remember what Mac the Knife's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen the German lyrics.
They like appear on screen.
Sure. Yeah, and they're grimmer than the lyrics in Mac the Knife. They're like more straightforward.
Yeah, they're just like, he kills someone and gets away with it. And then he kills someone else and he gets away with that too.
Yeah, and I mean, the choice of song, the sort of like lyrical, like the irony in the lyrics is obviously, you know, reminiscent of the killing we see from Asumi, and then also just the fact that this kind of like up tempo, like jazzy song is about like a skulking like murderer is, I think, also like in keeping with the presentation of the film. This fairly like upbeat, zippy presentation of, you know, a lot of horrific violence, particularly the last hour. Yeah. In which the song plays, I think. Multiple versions of it. Yeah. And, you know, we can talk about that. Really not working for me. The I guess not ironic. I guess very straight-faced use of that song over the murder of a bunch of kids.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but he's actually, like, snapping along to it at one point,
he's
right?
like sings it a couple of times. Or whistles it or something. He generates the song from his body.
I think by that point we're meant to understand that he's probably like hearing it in his head. Sure. Yeah. By the time he's like talking to the gun and stuff.
Yeah. That Cronenberg shotgun.
I wish that had been like seeded more throughout the movie. I wish there'd been more of that stuff. I wish there'd been more stuff reminiscent of the flashback aesthetically.
Well, I'll tell you, going into it, not knowing anything about it, it really worked. Because it is, for 45 minutes, it feels like a really straightforward kind of, like, humanistic crime drama. And then things start getting weird, and then eventually a shotgun has a fleshy eyeball on it. And you're like, yeah, okay. The path to this makes sense, I guess. For me, at least. I'm a pretty generous viewer, though.
Yeah, no, that is bizarre, because he's like... keeping score, basically. He's like, marking off the names while he's doing.
Well, he has to make sure he gets
shooting.
everybody.
Right, but then his gun starts talking to him, and it's like his partner's eyeball. I was confused. It's like, this is kind of interesting.
It is weird. It's a very weird choice.
Yeah, it is.
Is this one based on anything? Because I know a lot of his movies are based on books or mangas or whatever.
It was a novel and then a manga, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a multi-part series.
I wonder if that's a thing that has more context in the source
material. I do wonder
material.
if all of the flashback stuff is just maybe more kind of artfully
like fan service
throughout. Yeah.
It's like, well, I got to put Clay in the movie. All the big fans of the manga are going to be mad if there's no Clay in the movie.
So, Bennett, you talked about The Dead Zone. This is a movie that is 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Oh, for a second I thought you meant the movie The Dead Zone, and I got excited.
No, sorry, Jim. It's a long movie, and it's a very long, very brutal massacre of children in a school.
Bennett's favorite film.
The one he hand-selected for us. Do you think Miike makes this runtime work? Like, is it justified for how long it is?
It becomes pretty numbing by the end, I would say, which I don't know is maybe his intention. I'd have maybe cut down in my expert opinion, I'd have cut down that final sequence by maybe a third, because I do think the slow burn works. I think the kind of slow introduction of all the kind of drama within the school works, and it helps introduce a lot of characters, a lot of whom are naturally. We think they're going to be more important than they turn out to be. They get dispatched pretty quickly. I think that's all artfully done. And for that then to lead into, I don't know, something like the climax of this film and have it not take half the length of the film might have worked a little better for me. So I'll say, not quite. I mean, it works better than a lot of movies at this runtime, but
I think it's hard to gauge, right? Because I don't know that I ever felt the runtime, but that whole final sequence, even if it was 1 minute, I think
it felt pretty
so genuinely upsetting. You know what I mean? That feels like I don't want to be watching it anymore, no matter how long it is. I don't feel like I had an explicit problem with the runtime, but I did have a lot of problems with getting to the end. Yeah,
same. I don't know. There was just something about the way the massacre occurs that I don't know how to describe it, but I'm going to say I felt like nothing while it happened, because it was just kind of like, this is disgusting, but
I was so actively appalled the whole time.
It just kind of seemed like, okay, they're going for it, and here they go. It was just kind of like, turn your brain off and it'll be over at some point, It was just like,
the fact that it goes on for so long, is what made me think, Jim, that it might be some sort of Michael Haneke, is this what you want? Because by the end,
it just keeps going.
It just keeps going.
It's just,
but it also kind of gets worse. But it gets worse in a way that isn't like fun time Freddy Krueger worse. It's like now he's got 8 kids in a pile at the top of a locked stairwell, and he's just going to shoot them each individually. It's like there's no joy in that. It's just
disgusting.
It's just disgusting for another 3 minutes, while he gets them all.
Yeah. At the same time, though, then it is eventually intercut with that kid trying to get his bow and arrow.
Yeah, the Rambo kid.
There is sort
of
he just keeps
giving you
kind
hope.
of lightening of the mood. Yeah. I would say. And I've said before, I think I said last time we were on a podcast together, Jim, that I hate horror comedy. And I don't know what the right answer is there. I don't know if lightening the mood more during that sequence is the right answer. I don't know if being more
jokes,
appropriately grave is the answer. I don't know. I think just shorter or more suggestive would have been better. Yeah.
Or just end the movie before that happens.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you mentioned comedy, because I did see a few reviews where people were like, well, of course it's a black comedy. He's shooting up a school. But at the same time, it's like...
That's a weird reaction. Like Elephant, that classic black comedy.
Right, but it's just like it was... I think a lot of people are just kind of like, yeah, well, it's Miike. Let's cut him some slack. It's, he's doing this. But, I just don't feel like it ever dipped into black comedy territory. I think it's just a little too serious to be given that escape. I just don't think that's a fair reading of the film. It's more just like this character is deeply and truly disturbed and disturbing, and I don't think there's more to it than that. I just don't see comedy in it, but maybe I'm wrong. Do either of you see anything that could be construed as black comedy in there?
There was some stuff that I thought was fun. leading into the massacre. Like, again, so as Bennett says, there's sort of the first, what, 2/3 or half or whatever. And then there's Alan, right? Like, the shotgun with an eyeball could be funny. And the thing they've built in the school could be funny.
Is there any sort of commentary about, like, the United States in the fact that he, like...
That he was here, right?
So when the physics professor is giving kind of the rundown on how he's, like, not who he says he is, it's not like he doesn't jump into the rash of suicides at the last school that he went to. He talks about how he, like, went to Harvard and worked at, like, an investment bank, how he has this, like, weird background for being an English teacher. And it's like, I don't know, to me it was like, is he saying that, like, his, like, Ivy League education and, like, working at an investment bank is, like, what made him evil? Is he saying that, like, being around these evil people made him evil? And then it's like, I don't know, maybe this escalating in, like, the most extreme over-the-top depiction of, like, a school shooting is his way of, you know, showing this very American kind of violence taken to its extreme.
There is some kind of a backbone there, right? Like, with the idea that to be an investment banker, or I think probably to succeed in sort of the high-powered life that a lot of people who go to Harvard are aspiring towards, you do have to sort of moralize your horrible decisions, you know?
And if we pulled up the list of famous Harvard alums, I mean, there's plenty of the world's most evil.
It's like half of them are war
top,
criminals, right? Yeah.
But also, there's that bit when he's walking around. There's the one diorama that's like an astronaut with, like, an American flag, and I think he, like, stands it back up after knocking it down.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's true.
Maybe there's some.
Yeah, while he's murdering kids, he knocks down an American astronaut sculpture and picks it back. That's a really good point.
And he's an English teacher.
There is something there.
Yeah.
And he's an English teacher.
And he's an English teacher.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
He keeps saying good and great and exceptional and magnificent.
As if that American culture of exceptionalism and, you know, that hustle grind set
I think
culture,
you found it, Bennett.
As if that made him crazy.
Found it.
We got it.
Wait, can I mention, sorry, that you mentioning the sculpture of an astronaut reminds me that one of the other ways that this movie sort of slowly escalates is by just working in ridiculous art set pieces. There's, like, we see his apartment and there's a sculpture of a man with his head stuck in a bird cage looking really upset. And then later, I don't even remember who it is, someone else.
I think it's
somebody's dad it's the art teacher's apartment. We see him take a phone call in like a completely empty white room, except for a sculpture that's a table with a man bent at like 90 degrees, reaching with his like open mouth towards a bowl of food that's like 4 feet away from him, and it's so bizarre.
So I'm gonna ask a question that I think none of us are capable of really answering, but this is just kind of a subjective thing that each person has to decide on their own, but it's Miike, so I'm going to ask it. What do you feel are the limits of acceptable violence in film?
That is so hard.
I know, but I got to ask it. And this could be either personally or like what is like the cultural line we draw.
That's what, I feel like I can only answer that personally because culturally I don't believe in one, right? Like I think this movie and like Ichi probably and some of his other movies have been censored in various countries, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's ever a good answer for anything really, unless it's like genuine harm to a young human being or something. Yeah, I don't think anything that Miike has ever done, to the best of my knowledge, should be like censored by a country.
I think this one maybe it was Sweden.
I'm sure
said no.
It's gotta be
still not available.
I could see some censor boards seeing this. I mean, I doubt they even thought about like a release. I saw this played at the New York Asian Film Festival, but I doubt they thought about even the like smallest of art house runs here because again like we said up top, it's the most easy money premise for like a TV series or a movie
up
and
until
then, of course up until
for about half this movie I was like, I wonder why there isn't an American remake of this, and then I was like, oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm just turning on the news.
I see. Similarly, Audition, I don't know why there was never an American remake, unless there was and I just don't know about it.
Thank
but
God
it seems
there
like
isn't though. You know how bad that would be.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my God.
It would be Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Punching holes in ramen with the acupuncture.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, this is definitely this movie goes past my personal, which I don't even know that it's. I was trying to think while it was happening. I was like, what would make this acceptable for me, right? Like, if this were a Freddy Krueger instead of their teacher, I think I'd be able to handle it. If he were killing them in a way that was like interesting or was like doing something that was either maybe like flamboyant in some way, then maybe I'd be able to try like shooting lightning at them. Maybe I'd be able to truck with it better. There are so many ways that you could take this and adjust it a little bit and I think it would be easier for me to watch. But just an adult man murdering high schoolers in their high school is really, with a gun, is really hard to deal with emotionally.
Yeah. I mean, this sort of probably crossed what I would have considered a personal line for me. And I guess I wonder, if they had gone more fantastical with it, would that have made it better? And I guess it would have at least made it more palatable. I would have like rolled my eyes at like the glibness of having it be like totally like a fantasy sequence as he's doing this. At the same time, I wouldn't have to see like 30 kids mowed down. So I don't know. I probably would have landed. I'd be more likely to recommend the film if it had gone in some glib, fantasy direction with it. For me, it usually comes down to like, and it's something that I know I shouldn't do. It comes down to like reviewing the filmmaker sometimes, and like whether I can sense that they're getting like evident pleasure out of what is being depicted, because like there's a whole history, particularly on like HBO, of really especially like lascivious and like male gazy depictions of like sexual assault and that sort of thing. For me is like, I don't know, if I know that's part of it going in, if I have reason to suspect that, it's usually pretty easy to be like, not for me.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, anything, this sort of directly depicted sort of violence against kids, particularly in the school setting, is, I don't know, one that's pretty tough to stomach, and I don't imagine it ever getting to be easier. And then for me, as far as like gore and stuff that I find I have to turn my eyes away from, anybody getting stabbed, I find, for me, in like the stomach is usually like I have to close my eyes. Even down to like a needle. Like Craig, you mentioned the fear of needles. I don't mind someone like injecting so much. I don't mind someone getting like a classic like blood drawn out of like an arm vein.
Stop.
But, like something as simple as like someone with diabetes having to do like a shot in like the side of their like stomach. That for me, like seeing it something about it going in there. It's like, well, that's not,
What if somebody has to like reach or jump into a pit full of syringes?
Now that's movie magic.
So I've got a quick follow-up question to this. So Miike is someone who, obviously we have pounded this idea in. He's known for extreme violence. When you are known for extreme violence, you kind of have to keep upping the bar. I mean, is this just like a natural point where it's just inevitable he's going to end up, or do you think this one's kind of like, maybe it's time to, roll back from 11 back to 10,
I wouldn't mind a rollback. I do wonder if this is easier to watch in a country where people aren't routinely.
This doesn't happen all the
not
time.
to drag this into like real tragic events.
I found myself thinking of that
no,
too.
It's a fair point.
But it may be that in America, this is a more difficult movie to contend with than it is in Japan or most other countries.
Where this is like kind of like out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least,
where it feels
it's
like
the sort
an
of thing that would
impossible.
only happen in a movie.
Yeah. I don't know. So maybe for him, it doesn't feel as upsetting as it does for us, for cultural reasons.
Right.
But from my perspective, it's hard not to see it as like an upping of the stakes and like you didn't think I would go there, did you?
Yeah.
And then I don't know. As far as the rolling it back, I like that as the gods will. I mean, I don't know if you want to take it at like face value. Yeah, all these kids' heads are exploding. This is pretty grim, but like I don't know, it's like a slightly more lighthearted,
it's goofy
take on similar material. I should have just gone with that one.
Wait, Craig, just to support your theory that maybe As the Gods Will is a sequel to this movie. There is, I don't know if you guys caught it. The first thing that kills people in As the Gods Will is, what is his name? It's like Daruma, that like Daruma doll. There's a scene, did you catch it in this movie where they're running up the stairs and there's a Daruma doll sitting on the like turnaround railing, and we get a super close-up shot. Like camera stays on it for a second after they run past.
I did not, but that's interesting. No, because like I mean, I think we talked about this before we hit record, but I mean, the last shots of this movie are, they get him in custody, and he says, I don't even remember what he says. I kind of zoned out by this point, but he's like,
he says some Odin stuff.
Yeah, he's like, this was from the gods, and then one of the survivors is like, he's starting the next game, and then it ends with "to be continued." Yeah. And so I tried to find if there is an actual like sequel to this, because I know the manga series has like 7 or 8 parts that I could find, but I kind of wonder if As the Gods Will is intended as the sequel, just kind of like unofficially, like it connect the dots, like, of course,
sequel.
Yeah. But
yeah, he's arrested. He's held in captivity for a while. He develops god powers, as he claims, and then he escapes into the world with longer hair, played by a different actor, and wanders the streets using his Odin powers to have teenagers play games for children.
yeah.
And die.
Originally, our idea for this episode was we were each going to pick a movie because he has 115 movies, so we
Too
thought
many.
we should probably look at more. But As the Gods Will was going to be my pick because I think that's a movie that handles school violence in a more approachable way because it just, you don't have time to acclimate to it. You're just thrown into the middle of it, and you just hear, poof, and it's like, wait, what?
The beginning
what
of it
that?
is so elegant.
I thought I missed
great.
something. I was like, is there like a reel missing?
Yeah, because I think the first line of the movie is the kid saying, like, boy, I wish my life wasn't so boring
I wish
or
my
something.
life wasn't so boring, yeah.
And then heads are exploding. And then it jumps back to give you a little bit of backstory. And I was like, I'm mad it's giving me backstory, but it only does for like 8 seconds. And then it moves on. And I was like,
I think it literally
so
just shows
happy.
you him like moping around his house, yeah.
It shows the teacher's head exploding.
Oh,
it's like,
right,
here's
yeah.
how that scene started.
Yeah, but I mean, it is this, like, okay, this killer doll from space is turning heads into marbles.
Into marbles, just explosions of red marbles.
Yeah, and they're just all kind of like, oh, this is
So
screwed up.
good.
Like, oh no, what are we doing? But, they figure out, like, okay, we have to play the game. And then this whole movie is just a series of, like, killer games that are goofy. Like
With no explanation ever.
Yeah, and the next one is like, there's a giant cat, and we have to dress up as mice, or so it can't see us or something. And it's just so bizarre that, like, that one very much is, like, firmly in black comedy territory. It's like kind of indisputable if you ask me. Like, this one is meant to have some funny parts in it, despite the morbid content. Yeah, I like As the Gods Will a lot for that, because it's kind of him taking the extremities and the extremeness and rolling it back a bit to a more like, how should we get away with this?
Well, you're also in Lesson of the Evil. The character you're following is an amoral murderer.
Yeah.
Whereas in As the Gods Will, you're following these kids who are trying to figure out what's happening and how they can, not even really how what's happening, just how they can get out of it, right? Which is, so there's immediately, you're like with people you can commune with on some level, which is a relief.
Right. There's more of a, protagonist. It's not just like, this is the main character. We don't need to like him. But yeah, As the Gods Will, it's a fun movie, and I don't feel like I'm being like a creep saying like, yeah, millions of kids are killed, but like, it's worth a watch, because it has such an overt sense of humor that it's like, okay, you can get on its wavelength. If you don't like it, just turn it off. But it's possible.
It's like upsetting. It's conceptually upsetting, but that movie feels like it's like fun in the same way that like a Spy Kids is fun, or like probably a Hunger Games if you love that, or like the Maze Runner if you've ever watched that, if it's any good. It feels like it's on that kind of, it's like a lot of CGI, but it's like it's doing what it needs to do, and everything's kind of kooky, and it's just like things just keep happening and there's no explanation at all, and stuff is like, they're like, oh, the gym floor opened up and there's a huge cat, deal with it.
Yeah. These are two very different movies. They have some similarities and some differences. I think we've all basically already decided Audition is the superior film.
If I was going to recommend one, it would be Audition.
I think that's a safe bet. I'd recommend As the
It's one
Gods
of the
Will
rare
too.
times you can say that. Good Lord.
Yeah, pretty confidently. I mean, I'm glad that I watched Lesson of the Evil.
It's certainly...
There is some stuff in it that I'm going to take away with me. I will never, ever watch it again.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to delete it off my computer pretty swiftly after now having watched it twice. Jesus Christ.
Oh, you watched it twice? I'm sorry.
You're a bold man.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground on both of these. Any closing thoughts on either of these, or how they compare and contrast with each other?
So, you'll find Audition on lists of the most fucked up movies ever made. And I don't know that the reputation is quite deserved, because you see stuff like Lesson of the Evil and you say, wow, now that really is one of the more upsetting films I've ever seen. Folks, I don't know that I would recommend it. I would say check out some of his more fun movies. Check out Happiness of the Katakuris. Check out As the Gods Will. Check out Audition. I can't recommend Visitor Q necessarily.
I haven't seen that one. I don't know if I need to. I did, Jim. I have to say,
I
did
like
not
that
like
one.
Gozu.
When I watched it 20 years ago, I watched it, but I also loved Gozu when I watched it 20 years ago.
I fell asleep twice during Gozu.
That's wild.
That one did not do it for me. I don't know why. It was just, I don't know.
The
Not
Dead
my
or
thing.
Alive movies, all great. There's a lot of great.
Everything I've heard about those makes them sound like they're sort of shock for shock's sake as well. There's apparently like a tub
Maybe
full
they
of
are.
diarrhea at one point. In one
I
of those.
haven't watched them in like 20 years. But when I was a 20-year-old, they were all great movies.
Well, I think Miike is certainly an acquired taste.
Hey.
Sorry. He has a lot of interesting films, though, and I think he is someone who, regardless of your taste for horror and violence, I mean, I think he is someone who you can find at least one movie you'll enjoy. Audition is, I mean, I think Audition is a masterwork.
It's a solid choice, yeah.
Yeah, that's just a movie that does things I've never seen anyone else do, and it does them in just completely unbelievable in, like, how did they make that happen type ways. And I don't know, you really cannot go wrong with that movie.
It's so good that in an era when they were remaking every horror movie that came out of Asia, they didn't remake it.
Right?
I mean, how could you touch that?
That means something, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great one. But I think that probably wraps it up for today. We were hoping to do some more Japanese horror directors for this series, but October's a busy month, and we don't have more time or brain capacity for it. So we haven't quite decided what we're going to do next year for the October Horror series on Split Picks, but we've tossed around some ideas. I think it's going to be fun regardless of what we do. But Bennett and Jim, I want to say
I thought
thank
we were
you.
just doing Eli Roth, just 5 episodes on Eli Roth. Right?
Okay, well, we were going to do 2 Saw
Underrated.
episodes, or 2 Saw movies per episode. And it was going to be a 5-part series. And then we're all
Oh my
going to
God!
complain
Saw
about
Power
healthcare.
rankings. You have to do 2, and then bring them down, and then another 3 episodes with 2 each, and another 2 episodes. And then
There we go.
crown the king of saws. It's Bennett.
Hey, it's me. No, it's
Bennett's
it's Saw
Jigsaw.
6 or Saw 10. Those are the clear standouts for the series.
But Bennett, Jim, I do want to say thank you for joining. For Jim, you did too. Bennett, you joined me for all 3 episodes. These were so much fun. I really enjoyed looking at Japan because there's a lot of things that you just don't see in America coming out of from Japanese horror movies. And I mean, we didn't even touch movies before the 90s, and that is a big flaw of this series. I mean, we could have only done movies from the 50s, we really could have, but we'll find ways to get more Japanese horror on Split Picks at some point. It may be 35 years, but hey, you know what? This has been a ton of fun, though. I mean, thank you for joining, and again, we covered the Grudge movies. We covered Kiyoshi Kurosawa and Takashi Miike. All of them are films worth seeing at the very least, and there is so much in Japanese horror we didn't touch. So look around, you're gonna find a lot of crazy stuff. And I mean, we all mentioned a ton of movies that are worth seeing, and I love, and you guys clearly love too. So I think we're gonna call it a day there, though. Thank you so much. This October Horror series has been great this year, and the response has been awesome. So thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. Thank you for just knowing that Split Tooth is around and doing weird stuff. So we appreciate it. And thank you both for joining. We'll call it there for today. So
And there's
Thank
the
you,
door
Greg.
closing in another season of Halloween Split Picks.
until next time.
Zakunk. Actually, one time when I was younger in my 20s, I shaved male pattern baldness into my head because I think it's kind of handsome, but I also thought it was funny. It was like extra fun. It was super funny for me because I knew that it was fake, but everyone who saw me on the street just thought I had male pattern baldness. So it was like for a month, everywhere I went, I was just like constantly jazzed a little bit. It was good. You should try it.